On again.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you all for being here. So let's pick up right where we left off on this question that we were, circling around with the mayor and Dr. Cosgrove. Many positive signs in Cleveland. To what extent are those positive signs radiating through the entire community? Rhonda?
You want to start with me on that one? I would say I would agree with the mayor on this. It's not radiating through the entire community. I actually wrote down a couple stats. I walk around with my Tree of Life book. So childhood poverty, the childhood poverty rate in Cleveland is 54%, right? It's second to Detroit. We have a poverty rate of 36%. We're one of the most distressed big cities. We have a plus, from 2009 to 2012, Cuyahoga County has had $340 million in new projects, but only 1.4% went to minority or women-owned businesses. So whether we're talking about people who have income or don't have income, who find themselves impoverished or not, whether we're talking about young people who aren't even at the income generating stage yet, who are searching for that great education in a school where they can thrive, where they can learn, where they're not sweating, where they are sent home, whether we're talking about people who are established with businesses already, right, who actually have some foundation underneath of them, who are women and minorities, they're not accessing the spoils of the community, of the city. So it's not reaching its tentacles out everywhere. And one other thing I agree with the mayor on is he said, he's not into kind of having, at this point, philosophical debates about, about the issue. And he's trying to do, and I want us to do more. One of the things I think is really important is we can't necessarily have philosophical debates about that inequality exists, that injustice exists. But what we do need to talk about is why it exists, who it is impacting, and that requires not only a look at what's going on now, but it also requires a long view of some of the history, some of the understanding of communities that are hit a certain way. So we can't leave the past out. I'm a historian. We can't leave the past out. And so, why is Glenville not benefiting as much? Why are areas of Huff not benefiting as much? These are the places I walk down the street where I see potholes when I ride down the street. These are the places where I see lovely, enthused, excited people who want more for their communities. So why aren't we reaching them? We can't just focus on the downtown.
But we'll frame the challenge. Let's talk a little bit about some of the response. There was an interesting report a couple of years ago by a Brookings scholar named Alan Malak, who wrote about, it was about regenerating America's legacy cities, cities that were industrial titans in the middle of the 20th century and have faced declining population, loss of manufacturing jobs. And he argued in that one of the biggest challenges was to kind of shift the frame of reference from what has been lost to what might be going forward. And I thought that was a very striking observation about many of the cities that we have visited and others that we have not. And I'm just interested in your perspective. Is Cleveland at this point a place, Jonathon, that is mostly looking back to what has been lost, or mostly looking forward to what can be?
Well, I think that's a generational question, and also sort of an attitude, right? I mean, I think I choose to not really engage too much in the negativity of the past or the present, but really champion what's going on in our neighborhoods. So if I were answering maybe the same neighborhood question that you're talking about, I would disagree and say that Huff is much better than it was 10 years ago when I was riding through it. My offices are just in the corner of 55th and St. Clair. Is it where downtown is? No, but there's pockets that have this positivity that we can focus on, and we can grow them out further and further away from the vineyard, off of the medical corridor, all the way, because it can only go to the lake, right? I mean, there's only so many blocks we need to improve in those neighborhoods. And what I'd like to see is what's happening in Wade Park, and what's happening in Huff, and what's happening on the edges of Near East Cleveland. And I think that there is a convergence there eventually that we'll see on 55th and St. Clair maybe even, where they all tie together.
The issue is, and I know we're moving down the line here, but the issue is that I also see the problem is when you have a false comparison between negativity and pointing out the injustice and inequality. See, that's not being negative, that's being a realist. And that's also about talking to people in community. So when I'm walking through community, we're talking about how we enjoy Rockefeller Park. We're talking about how we enjoy the things that are improving. But I'm also hearing, well, what about us? And all this is going on downtown, and all this money that's gone into this and to that. So that's not being negative. That's talking to people who feel disenfranchised and disempowered, if we were talking about empowering people, to allow them to have a voice, to think about the positive ways and access the resources and the money and those kinds of things to do the work.
Sylvia?
Yeah, so I was going to actually say something similar to what Rhonda just shared with us. So I think there's kind of two ways to look at this. So the foundation, we've invested a lot in the future when you think about new economies for Cleveland. Part of transitioning an industrial city is reframing the assets that we have and repurposing them. And we see that physically in our buildings, but we also see that in our economy. So for example, the Cleveland Foundation is a significant investor and a huge promoter of sustainability. We are trying to build a wind farm in Lake Erie, the first freshwater wind farm in the country. We have $47 million federal investment. It's a big deal. It will create jobs. It will create an entire new sector of industry, an entire new supply chain for all of our advanced manufacturing industries here. It's an opportunity. But when you do, there are people who look back, and they look back for a reason. It's not always negative, right? And so I think what Rhonda is speaking about, to the people who have generations of disenfranchisement, generations of experience daily, day to day inequality, where they can testify and say, my mother went through this, I went through this, my brother went through this, my grandmother went through this, and I'm going through it today. That looking back is not, it's actually just the present. And it's being realistic about how the history of inequality and the history of disenfranchisement in this country affects people still.
I want to bring in Michele in a moment, but let me just follow up with you, because you said something. There was a report, the fifth migration report. Sylvia, I want to follow up with you, because you said something I thought was very relevant to what you were just saying in this report done by Cleveland State University. You said, I think Cleveland is a place of opportunity, and Cleveland neighborhoods offer an opportunity for redevelopment. If you are somebody who wants to build, not just consume, and you have a vision of your own, then Cleveland is a city where your imagination can come to life with minimal barriers. And yes, it's not all equal. Not everybody's vision is equal opportunity, but it's not like New York. It's not like DC. I can't remake a block in DC into a new neighborhood and then have it on a map in a year's time. But you can do that here,
Yes.
and that's really powerful.
I do. I really believe that. So I'm not from Cleveland. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I spent a good chunk of my career, over 10 years, in New York City. I moved to Cleveland for the opportunity that the Cleveland Foundation offered me to have real impact. So that's one. I think in Cleveland, and this may be the millennial perspective, if we want to frame it that way, but there's an opportunity to have direct impact on how Cleveland exists today and how it will exist in the future by being here in this moment in time. What I was referring to in my quote is the kind of the next step. So beyond the ability to have impact through your institution or through your job, there's the impact to do it on an individual level. There's an opportunity to do that. So you can actually take a vision, you can take an idea, and with the same hard work, with the same ethic, with the same need to be adaptable and flexible to the environment around you, you can create and implement your vision. And so I have myself included. I'm endeavoring on community development investments in Glenville right now on my own dime with my partner. But I have lots of friends who are saying, we have ideas, we have projects, and we're going to take them on for ourselves. I have a colleague here who started Hot Clee, as part of Hot Clee, and that's a group of us came together. It was in response to Tamir Rice shooting, in response to the anger, in response to the frustration that we felt after that situation, and we said, we don't have the patience, nor do we feel the need to wait for somebody to tell us what to do. And this organization has evolved over the last year to address open data issues, to address workforce issues. I mean, it's really coming up. We have, people who, Hingetown is, I think, the example that lots of people are familiar with, but Hingetown did not start, it was helped by the Cleveland Museum of Art, but it did not start with that institution. It started with two people who bought a building on a block that at that time, nobody wanted to invest in. It was extremely unsafe. It had crime incidents every day, every weekend. They bought a building, one building at a time, transformed it, programmed it, dedicated their own resources, and now that is a new neighborhood on the map of Cleveland. I mean, it's possible here with minimal, I wouldn't say there aren't any barriers, but minimal barriers compared to some of the other major cities in
And
the
this is where I wanted to bring you in, because there are a lot of impressive things about the foundation. But one of the most striking things about it is just the scale of its ambition. I mean, the magnitude of your project in Akron, working with students. Talk a little bit about what you do, but also the ability to basically kind of emerge. Are these communities that are open to new ideas, that are open to new partnerships? What has allowed you, certainly you have the resource of one of the most famous and well-regarded people in the world, but what has allowed you to basically build projects of this scale this quickly?
Well, let's start with, we have LeBron James, and he brought us a championship with his teammates, right? But that man is an incredible basketball player, but he's much more. One day, everyone will understand the impact he has as a man. And what's most important about him is he hasn't forgotten where he's come from. A lot of people that we're talking about today, it's well documented. He grew up with a single mom, very poor, moved a lot of times in his life, and a community came together to help him and his mom in his most desperate times, their most desperate times. And every time he wins an award, every time he stands up, when he was working in Miami, he always said, I'm just a kid from Akron. And he believes a lot of his success is because of the community that rallied around him and his mom before he was a basketball player. And he wanted to give back. And he's doing that in Akron, in the school system that he grew up in, that he sat in the classrooms. And what he has with our children is powerful influence, and he has given them so much hope in what he's given my very, very small but mighty team. I have half of them sitting here. He's rallied the community around us to make really positive change, one child at a time. And what I love about what he does, and I think what we talk about when we talk about Cleveland and Northeastern Ohio, if you look at all of our partners, they're all from Northeastern Ohio. Every single one of our partners is either a mom and pop shop or the company down the road. They're the ones investing in Akron kids and investing in the work that he's doing and believing in what he's doing. And we have one national partner that also has a presence here, which is JP Chase. But it's this area that's come around to rally and believe in his work.
You know, it's not infrequent for foundations to come into city school systems and say, we're here to help. And a lot of people are like, whoa. And the first reaction to be, well, wait a minute, what do you mean by help? To go back to my question, what has allowed you to build these partnerships both with the public sector, the school system, and your private sector partners? What is kind of is it his credibility, or is there something else in kind of the community that allows you to create this kind of web of institutions working for the kids?
So I think our school system is the first to say we need help. 86% of our students are on free lunch, so any extra support is meaningful, and they're not afraid to let us know where they need help, and they guide our work, and they tell us what to do. We're not the experts, so that has helped us. They welcome us with open arms. We respect what they're doing. We want to stand beside them and help them be a better school system and help them. I mean, it's hard for them to pass a levy. It's well documented. In the community, I think the people that have stood around us were a lot of people. When he left, we did a lot of this work, but no one talked about it. He didn't take this work and do it in Miami. He's been doing this all of his time that he chose to work in Miami, and it's just, when he came back, I think, his letter said, I want people to realize that Northeastern Ohio is a great place, the best place to raise a family, and he's putting his influence here.
Jonathon, I want to ask you the equivalent question that I've asked Sylvia and Michele. I've asked about the kind of civic sector. I want to ask you about the private sector. You have your own restaurants. You are working with entrepreneurs on the TV show with LeBron James, Cleveland Hustles. How do you rate this community as a place to take an idea from concept to execution?
Well, I think it's phenomenal. I mean, I'm speaking from a very personal and micro level, but I started in Strongsville as a dishwasher and now have 280 employees and 5 units, 60% are women. All of our jobs are in the city of Cleveland. So we've grown from nothing to sous chef to chef partner to chef owner to awarded chef to multiple restaurants. And I think in that micro level, there's frustration always along the way. But at the end of the day, we wouldn't do what we did here in any other city. Yeah. We also chose to come here. having lived in New York for years, and Miami and Rome and college and Dayton and Pittsburgh, I've seen a lot of these, both post-industrial cities and major cities. And my wife and I, as we were thinking about that next chapter, making the step from chef to chef partner or whatever, hobbyist to business owner, we chose this city for many of the reasons that are the same for LeBron. We're coming back here to show people that it's cool to move back here, it's safe to move back here, and I could pick anywhere in the world to raise my kids, and I picked here.
Sylvia, let me ask you and then bring Rhonda back in. Apropos to that, Steve Case, the founder of AOL, who now runs a kind of an innovation hub, he's argued that Rust Belt cities now have an opportunity to emerge as innovation hubs because the cost of doing business and the cost of living is lower than on the coast. And in fact, as many of us who were downtown saw from the bicyclists with the messenger bags, Cleveland, in fact, is adding millennials with college degrees faster than the country overall, even though the numbers are still relatively low. Is Steve Case right? Is that a comparative advantage now? As someone, can you see, would you recommend this as a place to come for someone, essentially a peer who is an entrepreneur who wanted to start something? Is it open for that? Are the resources there, the employment talent, the capital, the whole shebang?
So yes, I would recommend that somebody come here. That's the easy answer. But I would say that the investment, there's a way to go for that. So you have to be prepared to take advantage of the opportunities that come your way. And Cleveland is preparing. So in terms of innovation and becoming an innovative economy, we have a lot to do around open data. We have a lot to do with technology and digital inclusion that will prepare a workforce that can actually take advantage and become that opportunity that would support a new entrepreneur who's moving to Cleveland more thoroughly. I see my colleague here, Ray Leach, in Jumpstart, and investing in our entrepreneurs and investing in that ecosystem that support entrepreneurs is very, very important. But we need more. That's the reality of it. We need more, and we need people who are willing to take risks on new companies. My fiance is an entrepreneur, and one of the things that he said over a year ago that still sticks with me is the best way for a community to support an entrepreneur is buy their business, right? If a county says, how do I support small businesses? Well, give me a contract, because that will help me prove my concept, and that will help me attract other clients, and that's something that as a community we really need to be better at to become that innovative city of the future. But the quote is right, Steve Case is right. The Midwest does have a competitive advantage in theory, and Cleveland has to make sure that it can take advantage of the opportunity.
So to the extent that is happening, Rhonda, what does it take for that to become relevant to the lives of a 16-year-old in one of the neighborhoods that you're talking? What's the bridge that would connect those people? Certainly every community wants entrepreneurs to come in to create jobs, to create economic activity, but what would it take to make that relevant in the lives of the kids growing up in some of the neighborhoods of the city?
Right. So can I
Yeah.
throw one thing in here before I
Yeah.
answer that, and that is that I'm also the founder and director of the Social Justice Institute at Case Western Reserve
Right.
University. So if we're talking about bringing a concept, an idea into fruition, I would agree that there are all kinds of ways that ideas and concepts can be brought into fruition. And I guess I would say in terms of that bridge is what kind of ideas and what kind of concepts are being brought into fruition, what kind of ideas and concepts are being supported, who is being supported and who's not being supported, and how do we dig deeper in thinking about these issues? I tell my students one of our goals is to create social change agents, and that means that you have to be willing to ask the hard questions, and sometimes be willing to, when you ask the hard questions, right, in terms of the bridge and some of the ideas, to actually not feel uncomfortable. Because sometimes when you ask the hard questions, people don't want to hear what your question is, right? If you have a certain concept or idea that they're loving, that fits within kind of their paradigm and their model, if it fits within, for instance, biomedicine, fabulous. I'm not talking down against biomedicine or big data. I think, we need all of these things, but what about the ideas, other kinds of ideas people may have? And so I think we need to kind of create thinkers, create folks who think around the past in not a way that is lock jamming them, but in a way that is giving them the skills, the tools, and the girth and the framework to say, like, what does this mean for me here in Cleveland? How come if I live in a certain community or I look a certain way, how come if I'm African American or if I'm a woman or if I'm vociferous and passionate, I'm not heard a certain way? And is it incumbent upon me to always change? So we're talking about now bridging in terms of who makes changes. is it incumbent upon me to always change, or sometimes the businesses and the foundations and the government leaders to change, right? So if I can voluntarily, for instance, kudos, give $12 an hour to my employees, then why not voluntarily give $15 an hour to my employees? And why not argue for a more expansive wage set while also setting the standard in your own city? How do we think about the ways in which we can do that and not think about what the repercussions are as deficits, but get the great minds thinking about how we do that, right? And think about equality in that way, and also figure out pathways and mechanisms for saying, well, how can it work for us, and how can we, dare I say, shame those who don't think we should actually be doing that, right? And say, we still can thrive here. So the kinds of questions we ask and the kind of solutions we're building is also about the ways in which we train people to think and to be daring and risky in their thinking, just like we often talk about being daring and risky in our resources, right? If I could dare, this is what I do, I push edges.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna push an edge. If I may, I'm gonna push an edge. So we talk about the tax levies, right? And we talk about property taxes, and we talk about sometimes the hardships people have in supporting them, maybe. Maybe on whose backs those tax levies fall may not have as much resources as other people. So how many of us think about that question? How many of us think about that question? And then think about the question, how many big businesses across Cleveland, how many hospitals and universities across Cleveland are not paying taxes? What would happen if they kicked in a little bit of those taxes, those tax dollars? How could we transform what it is we're doing here in Cleveland with that source of revenue, even if there's a slight credit that comes with it, but there's still more that's coming into the coffers. This is about injustice and inequality. That's how you...
Let me bring Michele back in, because certainly one of the critical steps of ensuring that all communities can participate in the growth is getting people through high school and getting more of them into and through either 2-year or 4-year degrees. And that is the tentpole project that you have been engaged in improving completion rates. What have you learned about you are now how many years into the...
6.
6 years in. What have you learned about what are the most important measures that you can take, the most important levers you have to keep kids on a path to finish? And as part of that, a version of the question I asked the mayor, can you improve educational outcomes for kids without improving economic opportunities for their parents?
So I think the biggest lesson that we have learned is that we need to be authentic to what we're doing and really learn what these kids need. And you can't create a program that's going to work for every child. Every child has a different need. Some children are homeless, some are with one parent, some are moving tomorrow and going to another school. So we have to be able to change. And what's great for us, being a foundation, we can change quickly and we can react. If a child's not eating when they go home all weekend, how do you expect them to learn when they go to class on Monday? You're fighting a losing battle. So our biggest lesson has been to learn who our families are, learn who our kids are, and help meet them where they are. At the same time, hold extremely high expectations for them. They have to learn through how to work through the ups and downs of life and hold them to high standards. And we have found that they'll excel. We have children that never talked about college. We have the 20% lowest performing students. The one thing they have in common, they're entering 3rd grade and none of them are reading at a 3rd grade level. None of them. We have kids that are now on the honor roll, but LeBron expects them to work hard, expects them. There's going to be challenges in life, and holding that bar high, but also supporting them when they have challenges has been our biggest learning lesson. But you can't just make it blanket for everyone. You got to learn who we're working with.
So let me ask.
Let me just ask. So the Cleveland Foundation also invests significantly in education. We were kind of thought leaders in the Cleveland Transformation Plan that the mayor referenced. Over 10 years ago, our graduation rate from high school was 54%, I believe, and now it's 68%. and it's growing. We've started a number of new schools, and I would say I completely agree with everything that you said in terms of the need to support kids, and that's why, you know, as a community foundation, we invest in a lot of different things. We have that ability. We also invest significantly in those supportive networks. We think of them as the net that catches any kid and then kind of keeps them from falling so we can connect them to the resource that they need. But systemically, education is absolutely vital to the renewal that we're seeing today. And that ranges, so when we talk about lessons, we talk about individual children and their experience, but we also talk about the legal structure that affects our education environment. We talk about the assumptions that are made in our education environment. So when people say, well, some kids just aren't, you know, some kids aren't made to go to college. Well, what are you really referencing and investing? And that's actually not true. Or, you know, it's about what they're exposed to. It's about what they've been taught to expect of not just themselves, but of the environment around them, and creating different career paths and different alternatives early. So we've invested in a program called True to You in Cleveland, which is very, very much in partnership with the business community. Mentoring by next year, it'll be in every 8th grade student in Cleveland will have access to these type of mentors that can sit here and talk about these are the type of career paths, and not all of them involve four-year educations, you know, post-high school education. Some of them are advanced career trades that, by the way, will pay $100,000 if you get certified. You know, so, I mean, the education system, we've been working at this diligently for 10 years, investing millions of dollars, and there is a lot to do, and that cannot change as we move forward in the rest of this renovation.
So let me ask.
And as we invest in individual kids in the very profound ways that they're talking about, we also need to invest even more so in the public education system, right? So that we don't lose that as, I'm going to use the word entitlement, which is important. Every kid is entitled to a good, free education. So we need to invest more in public education. And as we do that, pay attention to the young people, right? And what they need and want.
And you may be answering my kind of final summary question I wanted to ask you. If we were to gather here again in 5 years, which I would recommend for the salted caramel and the coffee chunk, what would you say, Jonathon, I'll start with you. What would you say if we were to gather here again in 5 years? What would be the most important things that have to happen over that period for Cleveland to maintain a positive trajectory?
Well, I mean, I think our casual goal is to see 1 million people living downtown, you know, and downtown being the city of Cleveland proper. And I think that I'm in agreement with the majority of what we're saying here in terms of how we get there. But the most important thing is that we have more people working, living, and spending their money and educating their children inside of our city. It all hinges on that.
Sylvia.
So I've heard the mayor, he spoke a little bit about this today, and I've heard him speak about this passionately in other venues. But the equitable question, and in 5 years, Cleveland really has to address the inequities in how it's being revived and how it's being revitalized. That is really critical. And so when I think about what can be done, I think that the city has to, and all, you know, the public agencies really have to pay attention to how they invest in the infrastructure that enables the rest of our core city neighborhoods to be prepared to take advantage. In 5 years, I would love Cleveland Hustle to be able to go into every single Cleveland neighborhood and be a successful show. Right now, that's not possible, right? Because not every neighborhood has the resources, has the storefronts, has the street fronts, never mind the residences and the diversity of, you know, of people moving in. So I think that is absolutely fundamentally critical, and I also think in 5 years we need to do a better job of matching our visionaries of any age, right? Our entrepreneurs, our millennials moving in, but also our big thinkers to the assets that are built into the infrastructure of Cleveland. You know, so an example I would say, just to make it a little bit more clear, Detroit, for example, has a city called Motor City Match, where they match building owners with no tenant, with entrepreneurs who are looking for a place to hold their business. And it's just a matching of resources. We can do a much better job as a community of matching the resources that we have with the ideas and the people who want to use them in a creative way.
Sure.
Well, in 5 years is 2021, and that's when our first graduating class graduates. So you chose that. So I hope that we're graduating 220 students that when in 3rd grade they were identified that they would be dropping out of high school. And more importantly, I hope that they're career and college ready, and I hope they're proud to live here and you know, work here and raise a family here.
Rhonda.
I would say in 5 years, I would want to see if we're going to have benchmarks for downtown and what it needs to look like, I would say we need to have at least twice that in the communities that lie outside of downtown, if not 3 times, 4 times, or 5 times more than that. Because what often happens is we see a lot going downtown and we don't see a lot in our communities. And this ties to what Sylvia said in terms of the infrastructure. So the infrastructure of those communities, from the basic things like what a street looks like, whether you wake up hearing gunshots, whether you have a great school, whether you can walk to the museum and are welcomed in the museum, or you're welcomed on a particular street, or you're welcomed in a particular store, whether you in that neighborhood have the potential and the pathway and the resources to actually access money in ways that those who are more connected and networked already have. How are we extending out the equity to people in communities who don't even know the right question to ask, or who don't feel like they're going to ask any questions because nobody's listening to them anyway? How do we get a sense of the rejuvenation actually reaching out, so that when we're doing films like The Fixers, when the RNC is here to talk about the Cleveland that's forgotten, we can do some fixes and they can say, look what happened 5 years since.
Yeah.
That's what I want to see. That's going to be the register for me. It's not going to be the continual growth of the places that are already growing, which is good, but the places that aren't actually getting the resources to grow.
You know, I think,
Including the Social Justice Institute,
Yeah.
Case Western Reserve University.
you know, there's no question Cleveland, like many cities, faces a lot of challenges, but I think the audience will agree with me after listening to this panel that energy, passion, and ideas are not one of them. So you join me in thanking this terrific group. Margaret.